Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 89 of Retropower Uncut. That's starting this week, and we start from a room that a lot of you might not have seen because we don't look at it very much on our videos because it's kind of tucked away in the corner, which is our little in-house machine room. It's not the tidiest room in the place, probably one of the reasons it doesn't appear on videos all that often, but it's our little machine shop with our Colchester Triumph lathe and TOS FNK 25 turret mill and a pantograph engraver and a hot wash and one or two other things in here. But basically, it's where we do all the little machining jobs. Obviously, CNC work is all sent out. It's one of the few things we do send out for, we outsource with two very, very good suppliers. And we do send quite some of the jobbing work out to a local guy who's extremely good. But quite often, a lot of parts that we need are not really worth sending out, or we need them in a hurry, or there's a variety of reasons why we might want to make those parts in-house. So here's our little machine shop, and why we're starting here really is that's where I've spent a few hours this week. Not all of it, because we've been doing a few sort of day-to-day management jobs as well. But in terms of building bits for cars, I've been in here this week making bits like these bearing sleeves. For the back of the Mark 1 Escort project, Project 1, machining parts for that, and I've got quite a big pile of drawings and quite a big selection of parts that we're making for that. So I've actually been turning parts in here today and yesterday for the rear suspension setup on that, which is why we're starting here. But I thought we'd just show you James has actually been making a few parts in here as well this week. But I thought we'd give you a quick show of this because it's not an area you've really seen on the Uncut videos before. So we thought we'd start here. So yeah, I've been principally in here machining parts for the rear end of the Escort, and then also getting parts sourcing sorted out and various other jobs. So nothing that interesting or photogenic, but just quite a lot of turning work. So moving on from that, we'll have a look, and I'll try and get past Jamie without upsetting the camera. Hopefully, fingers crossed. We'll swing out here and we'll go past, we'll cover Jensen next, where we have been, well, Tom, more correctly, has been working on making the door skins for this. Obviously, we rebuilt the door frames, but the door skins on these are aluminium. We'd mused over doing them in other materials, but for a variety of reasons, because of the way they attach to the rest of the car, it probably made sense to stick with aluminium as material. So Tom's been cracking on with that. I'm going to put my coffee down, which means I'll never find it again. The complication, there's a lot of simplicity about these door skins, and then there's a couple of areas of complication. They're the original door skins, which are pretty corroded and in a pretty poor state. The bulk of it is very simple. It is a compound curve, but it's not a particularly complicated compound curve. A lot of it's actually barely compound. So making all that is not simple. Simple is the wrong word, but it's relatively straightforward. There's basically an initial curve put in on the bending rolls, then some wheeling to raise the centre, which also tends to adjust the curve that you initially put in on the bending rolls. And once you've got the principal shape in terms of curvature, top to bottom and front to back correct, then you start dealing with the edges, which you obviously leave over length. It's a very brief synopsis of how one makes the door. The complicated area, which I believe some of the door work was covered last week, but the complicated area is this top section, which I believe, looking at it, would originally have been pressed. There's no weld in the top of this door skin. There's welds in various other areas, but not at the top. And it looks to me like that would have originally been pressed, that section. And so we were thinking through ways of making that using the kit we've got which doesn't amount to a press. And Tom worked out that it would be possible to put the shape into this piece, this curved corner here, with a Pullmax tool, or Powell's nibbler tool, in the nibbler. So he's made the tool, trialled it, remade the tool slightly different, trialled it again with good success. I managed to make a profiled section for that, and then put this fold in and basically make this top section down to about here as a separate piece, with a view to, well, for two reasons for doing it the way we've done it. One is that originally there was a small return on the top of this skin, and then there was, well, what we referred to as a bodge plate. Basically, there's a plate that extends this down to meet the rest of the inside of the door, which presumably gave Jensen a lot of adjustment in where the skin fitted, which basically there was adjustment in where everything fitted on these, and there was a lot of bodge plates that join one part to another to enable them to be made different from one car to the next. What we thought is actually we might as well put a long return flange on there. We can still alter where we drill the holes to give us some adjustment, but it means there's no steel to aluminium corrosion issue going on there between the two, in addition to the other ones that will still be there, and it just makes it a neater end result. So so Tom's done that with a long return section there. That section formed, and then a return down to here. Which we'll see in just a minute, I think, because I think it's over there, and I think he's just got that now welded up onto the rest of the door, and he was about to start planishing it, but he's had to stop planishing it so we can do a video because it's a bit noisy. Once he's done all that and verified the fit, then he's going to get on to doing these little return sections like this, which fasten to, well, it butts up under here and fastens to that sloping section on the front of the door, but he'll get on with that, and that's going to be welded on the corner and then shaved back. We're going to redo these in a slightly more elegant way. We're going to redo that end in a slightly more elegant way. So yeah, basically we've revised the door skin design a little bit, and Tom's getting on quite well with that. We'll pick that up in a minute because we're going to swing around the back of Churchill, I think, next, and pick up the work that Stu's been doing in the back of here next. It's going to be a bit bits and bobs this, because I'd like to pick things up as we go by them. Stu's been working away in the back of here. Last week, I think you saw the initial stages of the rear chassis rails being made. He's now finished that, done the transition sections for the rear and forward sections of the rail where it goes over the rear subframe. The subframe's still in there. It's now lifted in on the little hydraulic lift, because the rail sections are all fixed in place now, so nothing's moving. So now the subframe's actually attached to the car rather than attached to the jig. And then he's started work on. He's got I won't look at it now, but Jamie will have some footage. The front transition sections that carry the forward of the two rubber mounts on this rear end are in place at the front, on the front side of that cross member, and then he's made some rear transition sections, some rear sleeves, some sort of feet, if you like, that transition the back of the rails into the inner rear panel inside here to spread the load from the back of the rails in. And he's then planned out how fuel tank mountings are going to be done, because the fuel tank's going in this space up above the rear axle here, and probably a little overhang as well. And he's also planned out how to do the dropped well within the boot, which is going to carry the space saver spare wheel and a few other parts as well. The battery will be off into one side and various other things out of the way at the other side. So Stu's been planning all that lot out so that we know what goes where and where he's got to put brackets. And he's been planning the structure for the actual floor section that's coming over here, so that we can get so we can put a reinforcer in where the floor drops down to the boot from over the axle to the boot floor. He's putting a folded return section at the bottom of there, which will be capped off by the boot floor, forming a box section, so that where it looks like it's just open at the back of the axle assembly there'll actually be a box formed into the folded sections of steel that goes across there that acts as another structural member, transverse structural member down here, down below at the bottom of the boot floor as well. So that's all coming together quite well. That's been Stu's focus of the week, cracking on with that. So we're going to move on and dart back briefly to, we'll dart back briefly to Jensen doors. We're going to go around this way. Camaro is paused briefly, awaiting some more polyester. We've actually we haven't actually run out of polyester. Gaz is slightly concerned that we won't quite have enough to do the blends, because we're going to do another polyester blend over the areas where we blocked through, and Gaz was slightly concerned that he didn't want to run out of polyester with just slightly short of the amount he needed to do those bits. So we're just waiting for the polyester supply to come in to finish that off. Now, if we swing back past what Tom's been working on, this is the Jensen door skin that he's been working on. So you can see the section he's made along the top using the tool in the Pool Max. That's all going to be filed and fettled and tidied up. Obviously there's a few little waves in it and bits that need to be fettled, but there's plenty of thickness to go out there. There's plenty of material to work with. I'm really pleased with how that's worked out actually. It's come out really nice. So yeah, he's happy with all that. So the next stage is he is planishing this weld down to get that all stretched back so we've not lost any length in the panel there. He's just started there. And once that's all planished down, he's going to file that, tap and file that weld back, and that should all be pretty much finished, ready to then go on and do all the peripheral parts of the skin fixing to the rest of the door. So that's coming on quite well. That's the end of Tom's work for the week so far. Bear in mind, we are talking at the moment, because of the way the week's going, we're currently on Wednesday afternoon, so we're actually not very far through the week really, but it's a bit of a juggler of a week this week. So yeah, that's where Tom's at on there. We're going to swing round this way then. We're going to swing past the body shop. I'm going to unfurl the door a little bit. We'll have a brief dwell on the body shop. I'm just going to stay here, but we are flatting and polishing the lacquer on the front 2/3 of the Stratos replica, while Gaz is doing there's some revisions that needed to be made on the rear clamshell. There was a change made by the customer for this car that they wanted to delete the rear spoiler, so that's necessitated filling various holes in and making some alterations at the back. So we've got to repaint the rear clamshell. While we're doing that, we're also altering the way we're doing the rear vents. The two rectangular apertures in the top above the rear wheels are the exit vents for the hot air from the two the water-to-air charge cooler radiators. There are two, one in each flank, fed by vents just behind the door openings, which cool the water that in turn cools the charge air cooler, which is on top of the rear bank of the V on top of the engine. And the air that has passed through those has to exit somewhere, and that exits through two louvres which are going to be above the rear wheels. We've just modified the way we're going to do those. They haven't been made yet. We've done a plastic one, a rapid prototype plastic one that we weren't very happy with. We've revised how we're doing those into a different way of doing them now, and so we're just making, while we've got the option to do that because we're having to modify the rear body anyway, we're actually taking that opportunity to alter those as well. So that's what's going on there. And then moving on, also with the body shop, or briefly, before we go carry on with the body shop, briefly over here, MX-5 Gearboxville, Rich has just been pulling apart we mentioned them the other week, pair of NB, I think they are, but it's fairly academic, which they're either NA or NB MX-5. These two transmissions. He's just pulled the back housings off those two, taken off all the other bits we need, the selector shaft, the various bits of selector mechanism from the back, and the speedometer drive gear, which I think I've mentioned before, which fits on the shaft here between two circlips, and there's a little ball bearing in the back there which drives it. Those bits come off, and those will fit the NC gearbox, this NC box here. All those bits transfer into the NC gearbox. We use the NB rear casing, which is a lot more compact than the NC rear casing. So that rear casing has just come off one of these gearboxes, has just been jet washed, put on this one. Rich has just washed all this off. This isn't the gearbox that will be going in the car. These rear casings will be bead blasted. And that is a mock-up gearbox. That will be replaced. This section will be replaced by a brand new one from Mazda. All of this is destined to be bolted to, that's obviously a mock-up engine, but the Sherwood BDG engine will be attached to Mazda gearbox, which will be a used tail housing on a complete brand new Mazda 5-speed gearbox, and then all of that will be going in the Mark 1 Escort. Well, same setup in both Mark 1 Escorts, this one and the one that's over there. And so Rich is just putting these mock-up parts together so that we've got a transmission that we can put on the engine and use all of that for mock-up while we're doing the transmission tunnel and any other work that we need to do in the car for dry build. So we're just getting ahead a little bit on that while we've got the opportunity. So that's what's going on there, in that sort of mechanical mayhem going on there. And then I think to round off this side, I'm going to upset Jamie again by swinging a door at him. And we're going to have to do... Gonna have to do a bit of a Krypton factor through here. Oh, look at that. Very good shot, I like it. In here, as you can see, we've got a sea of beige. We've got, I can't remember if this is the final batch of panels Gary's going to kill me now for not being able to remember, because there's that many pieces. I can't actually remember whether this is the final batch or not. I think it might be. I think it might be the final batch of beige painted sections for the Land Cruiser. There's an awful lot of panels, so I've lost track. But as you can see, we have Gary's done pretty well getting round all this with the spray gun, but he's managed it. And there we have a bunch of very shiny parts, all awaiting to be fitted to a Land Cruiser, which. On that note, I think that's probably a very good point to hand over to Callum next door in the assembly shop, and he'll be able to pick up again with the Land Cruiser and let you know what else has been going on with that.
Thank you very much, Nat. We're actually filming this one unusually on a Wednesday, because on Friday we're going to be going to Goodwood for Retro Rides Weekender. So actually, when you watch this, assuming you watch it the day it comes out, we'll probably all be stumbling around in a terrible hungover state in a field somewhere near Goodwood. But Land Cruiser, just saw Gaz painting the last of the panels. Prior to that, he did another batch, so the back doors and the windscreen surround. And as with all the panels on this, they're not fitted for the final time, hence why the doors, for instance, have got the old hinges on at the minute. It's just that we don't want to put them flat on a stand, because almost all the panels are visible on the inside and out. The painted finish is visible both sides, and we don't want to get any marks on them while the paint is fairly fresh, because you tend to find, I would say, for a good couple of weeks after painting, if you put a panel down on something for a while, it'll get an imprint of whatever you put it on in the paint. So I don't want to do that. But yeah, it's exciting to see bits coming together, and Adam's been working on some of the mechanical stuff, so he's just been getting last week he was getting the electric steering column in, brake master cylinder and servo, and the rest of the pedal box. So this is the original Land Cruiser heater box that's been prepped and painted. We've replaced the bolts, and then Adam's designed this machined part which we showed previously, which holds the Vintage Air fan inside the Land Cruiser box. So that's all looking really smart, and then the actual Vintage Air heat and AC unit is being mounted up on the inside of here at the moment. The last piece of the puzzle that allowed us to do that was George 3D printing the manifold to replace the original demist outlet manifold on this with one that was a bit more suited to our application, a little bit slimmer for clearance on the bulkhead, had the right size spigots for our demist vents, and pointed them in a way that was a bit more logical on this car. That's been printed in carbon reinforced PETG, which is a little bit more temperature stable than the PLA that we use for other components. So when we're doing heater ducting, it's always in that carbon reinforced PETG, just so it doesn't deform or melt under the heat of the heater. So that's going well. The battery installation, looking towards the back there, it's got twin batteries, which, if you've been following this whole series, when this arrived, that was sort of planned in from the early stages to try and get decent battery capacity somewhere that wasn't the engine bay, just to tidy up the look of the engine bay. So we fabricated boxes into the two back corners of the shell behind where the wheels sit that are accessed from the top. It's an 075 battery that slots into each of those, and then we've just been running the cabling that joins the two of those together, and then there's fusing as well. Both batteries have got fuse blocks on them, so if the battery cable shorts anywhere, it just blows one of those fuses. So you've got a link cable across from one battery to the other, and then a double terminal on the second battery, and then that one will then lead to the down the chassis to the engine at the front. So that's about where we're at on that. George has been doing the fuel tank design. So we fabricated recesses into the shell to put twin tanks to try and increase the fuel tank capacity a lot on this. So the final piece of that puzzle was George 3D scanning those recesses with the seat support frame over the top of it, so he could then use that sort of outline in CAD to then draw the fuel tanks themselves and maximise the use of the space, but make sure nothing was going to collide with any parts of the seat frame. So he's about done with those fuel tank designs, so they'll then be going off to Concept Racing, who are going to fabricate the fuel tanks for it. And that ties in quite nicely, actually, with the Morris. I'll come back to this in a sec, but we've got the radiator, the dummy radiator that we made, just fabricated in steel, offered up into the Morris, so we can sculpt a shaped top tank for it, which we're going to use to give us some expansion space inside the nose of the bonnet. So that's just been mounted up at the minute. John's got that in, and then he's also, while he was doing that, got the aircon condenser and the oil cooler in, so we can start looking at the aircon plumbing. So he's just in the process now of mocking up the aircon refrigerant lines. There's going to be the heater and AC unit, another vintage air unit that goes up behind the dash, so we've also got to mock up the refrigerant lines inside the car that go from the back of the bulkhead to the unit itself. Once they're all mocked up and cut and marked for their angles, they'll get crimped and pressure tested. They'll be ready to go in for the final time. So yeah, lots of plumbing really. I've been doing some work on the water rail on that as well. For the coolant water rail that comes from the back of the head, it's a race line water rail, which they sell for rear wheel drive installations of the Ford Zetec. But we're just making a few tweaks to the changes on that. So we need to put some temperature sensors in there, one for the gauge on the dash and one for the ECU. And the position sort of on the back of the water rail on the back of the head is too close to the bulkhead on this. So we're doing some little pads on the top of it, which we've drilled, and Jim's like machined a flat pad and drilled and tapped it so we can put the sensors in there. And then we're going to do a banjo on the side of that rail where there was already an existing tapped hole, which will then run the heater circuit. So there'll be an outlet there via the heater or via the bulkhead connections, which then feed the heater unit inside, and then back out through the bulkhead connections to a T that will do into the bottom hose. So it's largely coolant and aircon plumbing work that's going on that at the minute. I skimmed by Utah, that's in the air with Jim lying underneath it at the minute. So I have been out in this again. I was doing the anti-roll bar last week. That went really well. I've got the anti-roll bar on there, and first driving that, and it's really transformed the way it feels. The suspension always felt nice in terms of compliance on the front, but consequently with no anti-roll bar, it was quite body rolly in the corners, and it's just totally controlled that body roll. So very happy with that. We did some revised rear damper mounts, which were good as well, which have now been painted and refitted. And then Jim's just doing one little remaining job on the steering, which was, as it stands at the minute, at full lock, the tyres just contact the wishbones on the inside. So we're machining up some little stops to go on the rack bar just to limit the rack travel at the appropriate time, because essentially the rack gives it more lock than original, so thus allowing the tyres to contact the wishbone. So we're just limiting the travel of the rack more in line with what it would have been originally when it had a steering box on it. But otherwise, really happy with how this is driving. So I suspect we are definitely in the latter stages. I thought we might be handing over this week. The owner's going to the Monaco Grand Prix, which I think is next week, so he's leaving early next week, and we decided it made more sense to do the handover when he gets back. So we'll probably get an on-road driving video of this next week, and then the following week it'll be going over to its owner. Fingers crossed. Land Cruiser, back onto the mention of the Land Cruiser. The chassis, Jim was just building this up. We showed the leaf springs being done last week. That's now completely rolling apart from the rear shafts, and the only reason they've not been fitted is because we hadn't got the studs plated. Despite all of this organisation, there's always things that catch you out. So we had every conceivable fastener sent away, Xylan coated or zinc plated. And then when we were laying everything out to do the rear axle, we realised we hadn't sent the studs to be plated, so the rear studs are just away being plated now, and that'll, as soon as they're back, we can stick those in, get the rear shafts in, and that'll be rolling. And then Adam is now on with the engine build, so hopefully this all ties in really nicely. The block and heads came back from machining last week. Adam's just been working on initially getting the crank in there. They'd skimmed a bit off the block. I think it was 15 thou from memory, which is a reasonable amount. So we wanted to do a quick check we put one rod and piston in just to make sure we were still happy with the piston to head and valve clearance, in case we needed to skim any off the pistons, but we're happy that it's within comfort area. So he's gone ahead and got the crank fully in, so that's a case of plastic gauging, basically fitting it up with the bearings and a little piece of plastic gauge, which is like just a little sort of squashable plastic filament that goes under the bearing. Then you do up the main caps and the big end caps, and when you do that, it squashes that plastic out to a certain width, and from the amount of squash you can basically see what the gap is, what the tolerance gap is between the bearing shell itself and the journal, to make sure they're within tolerance, and they all were. So crank's now in. He's going to carry on tomorrow and get the rods and pistons in, and then yeah, that's just the cornerstone to getting that engine built back up. So hopefully everything will fall into place. We'll get shafts and studs back for that, get the shafts in, that'll be rolling, finish the engine build. The transmission's already come back from rebuild. The fasteners for the transfer box that Nat's rebuilding are just away being plated. So when they come back, Nat can finish the transfer box build, and hopefully we'll coincide. Engine, transmission and transfer box all come together beautifully. No drama or problems whatsoever, and it'll simply drop in, and then we'll put the body over the top. What could possibly go wrong? we'll find out in the next couple of weeks, because now I've completely jinxed it. We'll catch up with you next week. And actually what we might do while we're at Retro Rides is potentially film an episode down there. Now it all depends on whether we get so drunk that we can't actually appear to be professional in any fashion whatsoever. But if we do manage that, then maybe next week the episode will be from Goodwood. So let's see what happens next week. I'll see you then.
Hang on, I've got chair here.
So if you can catch it in a glass, that'd be better, because the swat will not kill it.
Yeah, SWAT is just going to tickle it and anger it.
Yeah, but what else am I going to do?
Spray it with glue.
Yeah, I do that, but...
Oh, he missed! Oh, no!